Hello, welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Hendersonville. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Ann Talley, your worship associate for today. I invite you to check out our website at uufhnc.org to find our activities that relate to the world today. And please join us on Sunday morning at 11:30 on Zoom for our Stones of Compassion and Beloved Conversations. We began today's service with these words from Reverend Angela Herrera, Senior Minister at First Unitarian Universalist Church in Albuquerque, New Mexico. They have been slightly adapted since their first publication in 2013. Don't leave your broken heart at the door. Bring it to the altar of life. Don't leave your anger behind. It has high standards, and the world needs vision. Bring them with you, and your joy and your passion. Bring your loving and your courage and your conviction. Bring your need for healing and your powers to heal. There is work to do, and all that we need to do it is here. So let us come in and then reach beyond the walls of this church. Let us fill this sanctuary with love, and then harness its power to stop oppression. Let us join together in worship, and together let us side with love.
Hello all, I'm Don Rollins and I serve the fellowship as accredited interim minister. As Ann noted in her welcome, we're really glad to have you with us for today's service. Just a few thoughts about why and how I decided to talk about a service, to put together a service on tears. The why came to me as I reflected on the number of pastoral requests since COVID's onset. More specifically, the many tears being shed via Zoom and phone, as folks share their burdens and their fears and, yes, their victories despite it all. The why is to normalize and honor all the tears we're shedding right now. The how came on the wings of human connections, the meeting of minds and hearts I share with the people I serve, both here and with my other gig, Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Athens, Ohio. So the how of this service became fairly simple. I introduced the topic of tears, and listened as folks talked about their pain and their determination and their lightness of spirit. As I listened, I knew my main task would be to share what was shared with me and just get out of the way. So let's talk about our tears. There is a sacredness in tears. They are not the mark of weakness, they are the mark of power. They speak more eloquently than 10,000 tongues. They are the messengers of overwhelming grief, of deep contrition, of unspeakable love. These words from the 19th century American writer and historian Washington Irving not only defend a place of crying in our lives, they tell us that our tears bear the mark of something sacred, something that is deeper than the sunny, but not always authentic fine we say when somebody asks how we're doing. I think that something is sacred and it's deep. And behind that word fine is something I think that says we are a breathing human being. We have struggles, we have victories, we have mountaintops, and yes, we have valleys. And we cry. We cry when we're lonely because we are hardwired for connections. We cry when we lose someone or something precious because we're hardwired for even deeper connections. And we cry And we cry when this world is mired in inhumanity and injustice, because we are hardwired for something even deeper, our belonging in the human family, our connection to the source of life, which sustains us from one breath to the next. I think that's the something sacred. So for me, crying is almost always about connections, whether they're being interrupted or maybe even severed. Still, crying is about something to do with connections. So what about the tears of joy, you're wondering? Again, my answer is all about the experience of connection within and without. Examples. That wacky surprise party is a connection with mystery we just didn't see coming. That funny story has us doubling over and we have a good belly laugh. That amazing piece of music we've never heard before. That child who reminds us to keep hope alive. That encounter with an animal that reminds us of the wild things. That kindness done for us, evoking so much gratitude. We want to return that kindness wherever and whenever. The list of joys and tears of joys keep going, because according to Washington Irving, our tears are made to connect us not with just our grief and our contrition, but with that most human of all experiences, state of being called love. If these thoughts seem way too fuzzy, too warm, let me throw in a little something for the evolutionary-minded right-brainers out there. Recall that as we talked about all this love, language was one of the last things that happened to our species. Same with writing, one of the last things to be developed. These things are way ahead, language and writing, of some things that are very important. Things like facial expressions and body language. So somewhere in the biological mix, and I believe early on, came tears. Before we could talk, we could cry. And despite the ageist insinuations from the middle schoolers I once taught social studies, I was not there when the first human tear fell. But even as we factor for the DNA-driven cleansing that a good cry provides, I got to believe that first tear had something to do with connections. Lost, kept, found. Somebody was moved to tears. Something changed. Now, back to my fellow intuitive types. You may have heard a story about connections whose origins aren't clear to me. I want to tell this story, but first a warning. Because while this story is at least decades old, it's also a tearjerker. And it is hauntingly relevant to today, especially for those of you who have lost or might be in the process of losing a beloved one to the virus. So that's the caution. Here comes the story. A boy with a rare disease had to live his entire life in a sterile plastic bubble for a single germ. An unsterilized touch could be fatal. Anyone reaching him through the hermetically sealed opening in the bubble had to wear sanitized gloves, and everything that came to him, books, food, utensils, gifts, all of these things had to be decontaminated before passing through that opening. The child was sealed off, isolated, in permanent quarantine. But even the airtight, sterile bubble couldn't save him. When the boy understood that he was dying, he asked for only one thing, to reach outside the bubble and touch his father. Doomed, knowing that this encounter was death itself, the boy reached out to touch his father's hand. I include this story, a story that would be very painful for those of you who are now crying every day because COVID has either threatened your life or broken your heart. Some holy connection for you has been severed. But I suggest that this is universal, if not in the same measure. For in the end, fear and agony and loss are our common lot, not our equal lot, but our common lot. As I think about that story, I think we are all that beautiful, isolated child. I think we are all that parent, strong, yet broken. We are all of these characters and more. And so we cry. Just a final reflection on tears. I believe in theological language, which sometimes gets me in trouble when I start talking about, for me, the deep things around God and spirit. But sometimes theological language is helpful for us all. Think about the word lamentation. So common are tears in the Hebrew scriptures. An entire book, of course, Lamentations, is given over to prayers and pleas for reconnections with one another and with the God of the Hebrew nation. And not far into that first chapter of Lamentations, the author writes, I weep, my eyes flow with tears. Here in Holy Writ, there is no denial of what it means to be human and what it means to be human, a human who cries. The word weep comes in the English translations. The word weep because the eye is flowing with tears. And lamentation is likewise shot through the Christian tradition, including those heartbreaking scenes in which Jesus, on at least 3 occasions, looks at humanity's great suffering, and he too weeps. I think these are the tears, the messengers of what I would only call a macro lamentation, a macro balcony view of what we still do to each other, of what we still do to this planet. So in this context, lamentation is liberation. This is the liberation Jesus moved to tears as he overlooked Jerusalem, and he thought about justice. And we know this because of what happened later in the Christian scriptures, as far as the sequence of time. First, Jesus cries. And so we can speculate about why he was crying, because we can speculate on other parts of his ministry. I think he was crying in the name of justice. And not just a cause, but for particular people. I think he was crying for the throwaways and the losers of his time. I think he was crying over women, over the enslaved, over the many sick he encountered, certainly over the poor. I believe those are the tears of the liberator who laments in your heart and mine still today, grieved by the world around us and pushed to grieve beyond just our own problems. We're grieving over the condition of the soul of the world. These are the tears we shed on behalf of others in our planet home. These are the tears that point us toward connections that serve the greater good that Washington Irving dared call love. So we cry. We cry because we must. We cry because that is what we do. Let me close with a quick story and a quote. For a while back in the mid-1980s, I attended recovery meetings for survivors of families plagued by continuing misuse, drug misuse, and addiction. Per similar 12-step-based programs, tears were just part of the process, part of our culture. There was space for those of us who needed to cry to do just that. And sometimes the first timers were taken aback with all that crying. And I would add, by the way, the earthy laughter that happens when people connect around a common experience. Yes, we got rowdy too. But the recoverers among us who took turns facilitating the meetings, they stuck to the process, save for one maverick addition to the standard closing. And I want to leave you with this phrase, fellow criers. What they said at the end of our meetings was, never miss a chance to cry. And so I say to you today, as we walk this path we call the human experience, as we walk that path together, we should not miss an opportunity to cry.
On behalf of our congregation and staff, we thank you for being with us as we live out our progressive faith online. We hope you might visit with us again, both virtually and on that glad day when we return to our campus and our sanctuary. For today's benediction, we return to a passage from Don's sermon, the quote from the 13th century Sufi poet Rumi. There is a sacredness in tears. They are not the mark of weakness, but of power. They speak more eloquently than 10,000 tongues. They are messengers of overwhelming grief and unspeakable love.
My life goes on in endless song above earth's lamentation. I hear the reel, the far of him that hails a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to the rock I'm clinging.